So sit back, relax. If you can sit with your feet flat on the floor and your back straight, that's helpful. Take a few deep cleansing breaths. By that I mean 2 or 3 breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. And sometimes you can even just sigh audibly as you exhale. And that has been shown that to actually increase oxytocin levels. And then just breathe in a what we call square breathing. So you might breathe in to the count of 2 or 3, and then hold the breath for the count of 2 or 3. Breathe out for the count of 2 or 3, and then hold for the count of 2 or 3. See that it's a sort of a pause in between. And then I'm just going to guide you through a few questions that you can ask within yourself. So, what is it within that is innate, inherent, and can never be broken and never goes away? And what is it when you turn your attention to the felt sense of being? Where do you locate awareness in that? And can you make a shift from a being that does into a being that simply is? Think of how the animals are in the springtime. There's no need to do or be anything. They just be who they are. Think of the point of view of perception as being. How would you describe the location of your awareness? If you sink into the expanse of your center, like how would you describe yourself as being or as beingness? How would you describe your relationship with time as beingness? And right now, in this moment, is there any change that you could make to your beingness that would make it any different or better? It's as if this awareness, this beingness has no lack or want. And as being, are you unfamiliar with this? Or is this almost some something that's been around with you all your life so that it's familiar on some level? You may not nourish it every day, but does it feel familiar? So what we're trying to connect it with is that unified field that does connect us all. So when you're ready, just open your eyes and we'll just go around the circle and say something about how we're doing. I guess I'll start. So my name is Gabrielle, and I'm rolling with the punches of the changes we've experienced this week. I've been trying to adapt really quickly to the the changes in scheduling, the changes in, I have live classes that I teach in person, so I've moved all of them online, and having to promote that and change that and set all that up and has been a challenge for me. Um, and um, yeah, and I also, became increasingly aware and clear that this was bringing up some old stuff for me, because when I was in the depths, the worst period of grieving myself, I isolated from people intentionally. I had zero tolerance, zero patience for some of the BS that people deal with on a daily basis. So I don't know, just the way that the things that people get worried about. So the shorter my tether got, the more I just moved away. And so, it's been a 7-year process of moving back, opening up, being willing to put myself out there and reach out and connect with people. And so this virus mandate that we stay away from each other was a little bit threatening. And so I'm so much more grateful that we already had this in place. I mean, we're already moving towards doing these online circles and making connections with other women in this way. And so I decided my choice is to run with it and to just use this as an opportunity. Obviously, it's a situation that is troublesome, but I guess the theme I would like to ask you is, like, how are there ways maybe that you found to take what's going on and flip it so that you could focus on something that is a benefit for yourself? Present, and how do I make peace with where I am? Because if we're resisting what is, then what causes the suffering? Because it's not the event that causes the suffering. The event is impersonal. It's out there. It would happen whether we were there or not. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like that, or
Yes.
the person, if it's not necessarily a world event, but maybe a person, that person would act the way they act regardless, I mean, or if they have some weird family entanglement with us and they're acting weird or destructive or whatever, or have acted destructive in the past with us, again, it's still not really personal because it's all about them, right? Because that whole relationship is a narcissistic relationship, and it's about them, not about us. Which actually makes me think that a piece of what we could talk about today that's really relevant and important is how to recognize even the most subtle elements of the victim mentality, because I'm sure that most of us are aware of its more obvious qualities and have probably grown past that. But the thing that's really strange about human behavior is that when we have these patterns, they go underground, right? And they get more and more subtle. And then all of a sudden, 10 years later, you notice, wow, I guess I really haven't quite cleared that thing, right? Is that, so yeah, I don't, so should we keep going around the circle? Does anybody have anything they want to add at this point?
I was wondering, did you mean when you said the victim mentality that the codependent has the victim mentality? That's, forgetting yourself.
It does remind me of the whole victim dynamic, because that's a useful construct that we can talk about that will help me explain how to get out of it. But okay. The codependent, let me think about that question for a second. Yeah, I suppose on some level, there's a fine line between, well, so these are archetypes, actually, what we're talking about. There's a fine line between the victim archetype and the martyr, right? Are you familiar with Carolyn Mace's work? Ever heard of her?
No.
Okay, so
no.
It's all right. I'm just laughing because I'm starting to appreciate how much work I have, how many things I have studied, and I just take it for granted because it's my process to try and find a better way, right? So anyway, she's a medical intuitive who's written a couple of books, and she wrote one that was very interesting, and there are audios of it, about archetypes and how we get sucked into them. So you could look at, one way to look at your life is through the lenses of these various archetypes. And if even as, and that appealed to me, I think, because even as a child or a teenager, I was living mostly with my mother because my parents divorced when I was 6. And my mother was like the embodiment of the martyr archetype. You know, she loved us. She was great. She was very fun. She was, you know, kind of hedonistic, loved to enjoy life and food and drink a little bit too much. And she had this thing where she pretty much drank herself into oblivion, ended up in the hospital in a coma for many months. I don't know. It seemed to me that it was up to a year, but I don't know. My brother says he can't remember, which is weird, you know, blocked it out, right?
Right.
Either way, when she came out of that, we lived together. We went to live in Switzerland, where the country of her birth, and we lived there. So I lived there for 9 years with her and my brothers until they left for college. And my point is, it was just obvious to me that she was talking about, you know, her marriage and how it was all my father's fault, and she was living in the past, living in 10 years ago. And as a teenager, that seemed ridiculous to me. But what's so interesting about these patterns is that I have myself recreating the same patterns later in life. So that's like they go underground and then they rear their heads up like groundhogs, you know, and then we look and we say, oh, my mother. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is that, you know, Catholic country, she was, she was raised as a Catholic, but she said, she would say things like, you know, I came back, like I almost died, but I came back for my children. So that's like a heap of guilt to lay on a kid, right?
Wow, yeah.
She didn't have any money, but she would spend way too much money on us, and then she would go without, right? So
Yeah. Okay.
it was really clear to me that she was being a martyr. And so that particular archetype was really clear to me, you know, in the world. And from there, I started to look at, well, so what other archetypes are there? And then, you know, later, having spent time, I was not physically abused as a child, but my mother, when she drank, was emotionally abusive. And so I seemed to, as a young adult, ended up in these physically violent relationships because that was just felt familiar. It felt normal somehow, I guess.
Right.
So then the victim archetype, I spent a lot of time in women's circles or groups. This is like group therapy, talking about painful stuff, and with some really angry women in, you know, in domestic violence shelter type environments. And that's another place where I really got that this, if the circle is not constructively held and directed in a constructive, positive direction, it can go south in a heartbeat, right? And then you end up spending years going to these groups where people are basically just whining and not getting anywhere. So those are the two archetypes that are actually the most clear to me. There's a post. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So your question is probably, well, okay, so now what? Awareness, right? I've got the awareness, but what do I do with it?
Pretty much.
Any comments, Michelle?
No, just waiting for you to go on.
Okay. So with that, then I'll talk a little bit about our topic today, then, which is, you know, the idea of what is the wizard do, and how do we relinquish these identities of the victim or the martyr or whatever archetype we seem to find ourselves living without meaning to. And I just want to touch on how we get set up for this. So what the work I'm doing now is based on is an understanding that there are these different kinds of consciousness that we live with, right? So we have the conscious mind, which is what we use in our everyday lives, but it only runs maybe 20% of what we do, right? Like 80% of what we do comes from the unconscious. And then there's the super conscious, which is a new way of probably talking about the unified field, the source that we come from. It's the part of us that is that sort of ground of being, that that whatever it is that's on the other side of the veil, right, between life and death, that place whence we come. You know, I mean, we're born into a body, and there's a genetic code that determines, you know, whether we have predispositions for this or that. But it's only when we're born, between the age of, you know, birth and maybe 4 years old, or probably even in the womb to some degree, because the audio part of the nervous system, the hearing, we can hear things almost immediately. Like within 4 weeks, there's a heartbeat, you know, of conception. And then the first part of the nervous system to develop is the audio, the ability to hear. So we're hearing and we're feeling the vibration, because of course the womb is like this liquid environment where, you know, and you know how vibration goes through liquid really well. So, but somewhere between there and 4 years old, we have this social programming and this family programming. And it's basically, we end up learning to just follow the rules. Like, you shouldn't have your own goals and aspirations or your own personality that's too deviant from like what the family expects. So if you follow the rules, we'll love you, we'll feed you, and you'll be safe, right? And it's, none of this is stated, but it, in the mind of a 4-year-old who or a child who is born in complete innocence and awe and wonder, there's some point where we become, where as the ego develops, where we start to realize, oh, wait, I can't just sit around and be cute, right? It's not enough. So then out of that, you know, we start to generate these beliefs and the beliefs create patterns over decades, and they create an identity. And one way to look at those identities is like archetypes. I think are useful because they help us, and that's not in any other way than that they sort of help us see, you know, if we look at the archetype and then we look at our life and we compare this pattern of the archetype, and we can say, well, yeah, that's uncomfortable because I do recognize myself in that. And that's about as far as, I mean, so they're useful for recognizing our own patterns, I think. And I think last week we talked about shifting the identity of loss. So I would go back and, you know, finish the rest of the video. And there's a process at the end of it too, which will help shift that identity. But then there are other identities, right? So it's like each one of us has multiple identities, you know, depending on who we're dealing with. We behave differently with one person than with another. I used to joke, like people would say, how are you? And I'd say, well, I'm, you know, I've been hanging out here with me, myself, and I, and I was, but the truth is we actually probably have more than 3 identities that we float around with. And so today, I guess really the topic is, you know, the relinquishing the victim identity. So our lives become this process of resolving the underlying pattern of whatever the identity is that has come to see itself as lacking or not good enough or wanting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So as a child becomes a self-conscious person, you know, they're suddenly expected to do certain things or behave certain ways in order to be acceptable. And so this creates a tension between the beliefs that that we have and, you know, a need to validate ourselves, justify ourselves somehow for within that identity or that person that we're feeling like we're supposed to be, I guess. Can you sense that there's a tension there?
For me, absolutely all the time.
Okay.
You know?
So then if you consider, so there's this, and then I think it makes us live out of our heads to some degree. It's like, let me see what I can do to please other people so that I can be okay. But then it cuts us off from our hearts. And you could say that our heart is the place where we possibly connect more with, you know, our true selves, with the unified field that connects us all. It's not necessarily, there's no thought, it's not visual, it's not, it may be more of a feeling interaction than anything else, right?
Right.
But because we're taught to cut off that connection, then we end up living with emotions that are completely excessive, completely like off the charts because we've ignored them for so long. And so what this is about actually is starting to shift that completely. So instead of living at the effect of emotions that are full of turmoil and running rampant and, you know, driving us to do things we don't even realize we realize we don't even want to do, and to feel things we don't want to feel. What if we realize that the emotions are like a guidance system, like a GPS system? So they help us navigate the path of least resistance. They help us figure out this, and it's really simple. When I think this thought, I feel okay. When I think this other thought, I feel like crap. Okay, that's guidance. That's like, you know what, that thought's not constructive. That thought doesn't help me. Let's go think this other thought, right? And so the processes are meant to solidify that, because you can't really make a huge dent in all this consciously. Because if the conscious mind is only 20% of what goes on, then these other processes that help us go into the heart and tap into the field and make the changes at the level of identity, then we can move through this stuff much faster. It doesn't have to take 20 years or 10 years or whatever, right? That would be nice.
That makes a lot of sense for me.
Good. So this was, I mean, it's kind of brutal, but I guess I can say it from my own experience. Sometimes I look at myself and I say, wow, I'm over 50 and I still feel like I'm living like a child. And now I know why. It's because I'm living out these beliefs and identities that I took in before my ego was even formed, before I was old enough to have discernment. And I'm still living out of those identities, right? No wonder everything's like people react to me in strange ways sometimes, or no wonder I react to people in strange ways. So instead of living like a child in the body of a 50-year-old or whatever age, I try to ignore whatever age I really am, because I don't really think, I think things are timeless. We're timeless. Consciousness is clearly timeless, right? Because you age and you look different, but people will call you up on the phone, and like I remember not too long ago, somebody on the phone said to me, well, you don't sound that age. And I was like, well, what does a person that age sound like? It's like, I'm still me, right? It doesn't matter how old you are. You're still you. That is timeless, right? So how do we tap into that part, which is the underlying structure that that generates, like, what we're talking about? Another way to frame it is, we're talking about a structure that we have these beliefs and this identity, and so there's a tension between that and the need to justify who we are, and that's like a dysfunctional structure. So what we need to do is create a functional structure that leads, because that structure leads inevitably to a sense of not being enough. So if we shift the identity, if we create a new identity, like, it's good to know where we are, because Because if you're on a journey, you have to know where you're starting from. Otherwise, you can't read the map.
That makes sense.
So when this is the piece where I feel a little bit is important that, I don't know, the people that I work with, sometimes I don't know that they get it because some of them are younger. But it's like, we don't need to belabor what's wrong with where we are. We get that, like, way too much. You know what I mean? So we just need to have a great way to start from. And that way we can read the map or create a new map, right? Which is kind of another way of thinking about what we're doing. So, and so I've already talked about, finding each and every belief that we have is a long, slow process. But if you think of it, I'm just trying to give you a sense of how it could work, or a model, to a paradigm to see this through. So if you think of the Grand Canyon, right, the path of least resistance is where the water goes. And if there's like a big boulder in the way, then it's going to go around it. And each of us, our subconscious is kind of like that. The way it works is it just follows the path of least resistance. And when we have a negative identification or a negative self-image, the path of least resistance is to a negative place. So when we start with that awareness, that's point A. The new awareness, point B, that we have not messed with and that they don't go to in therapy much, is actually a self-generative creative process. And I love that because I'm a writer. And so I love the idea of being creative and applying that to your life. So the point B that we need to think about is, well, what is the identity that you would like to have? And who is it that you would want to be? And who spends time thinking about that when they're, grieving or traumatized? Nobody. It doesn't even occur to you, right?
Mm.
And have you had the experience where anybody had the experience that creativity is generative in its own right? Michelle, I know you write sometimes. Get new ideas when you're writing.
Oh, generative. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. One idea sparks the other, and
Yeah, that's why this is different. It's not a healing model. It's not an educational model. It's a creative model, because creativity is generative. Like you're going down the road in the dark. You got the headlights on, and you don't know where you're going, but you get to the next 3 feet and the 3 feet after that, and you start to see what's in front of you. And so it's the next logical step that we're looking for.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get that from when my husband puts on some real wonderful, soft, beautiful music, and I can feel that I'm coming out of whatever headspace I'm in, and my emotions are, kind of crazy. I can feel my body actually calming, and then I end up being as close to that music and my husband as possible, because I recognize, my spirit, I suppose, recognizes that I need that. I'm hungry for that again. I used to do that many years ago,
So what you're talking about is, on some level, and this is from neurolinguistic programming, which is otherwise known as NLP. So they talk about a state change. And one of the reasons I don't listen to it nearly as much music as I used to either. When I was 20 something, I wish I had made this decision about my life. But I remember thinking that I could have made music my religion. And if I had done so, if I had chosen that as my identity, that would have been a completely different life. And I probably would have been much happier. Live and learn. But now we get to redecide. We could decide again, but it's a little trickier now because, when I was 20, or when any of us were 20, we didn't have all these associations probably with, well, even at 20, actually, I have to say, I had associations with certain music that was really strong. But, flash forward or fast forward 20, 30 years, in situations where, like there's been rejection or loss or grief or whatever, music is one of the most direct ways to change your state. But there's different kinds of music out there, right? So there are, like, on the one end of the spectrum, there could be music that really gives us a sense of joy. But there's also a lot of music that is about sorrow and codependence. I can't live without you, and victim, and nobody knows the trouble I've seen, right? That's a whole other, at least half the spectrum of modern music, if not more. Actually, it's probably more like 2/3, right? It's actually harder to find the other part of the spectrum where this music just makes me feel like dancing and being alive, right? So I think it's common when people are experiencing profound grief to stop listening to music, because you have no control over what, especially if you're listening to a radio station, you don't know, where they're going to take you, and it could take you to a place you don't want to go, a dark place. But so here's the thing, if you consciously understand these principles, you can be very deliberate. And nowadays it's so easy to create a playlist. And honestly, the truth is I haven't really done that myself. I have, but you could create a playlist so that you've already you've sorted out in advance what's the music that is up for me that really makes me feel alive. And everybody likes to feel needed, so if your husband enjoys doing that, you can just be appreciative, it's okay. But yeah, just being really clear about listening to music up would make it feel safer to go back to that person, because that sounds like it was an identity for you that was a really good, positive identity, and it would be nice to call that one back in, right?
Right.
So the shamans of, like Africa and probably South America and Australia, their whole framework is that disease is caused by the fact that we've like cut parts of ourselves off. And so what they do is they go into some kind of a dream state and they call those parts back in, right? And that's a beautiful and poetic way of looking at it, but I don't relate to the shaman thing. So as a Feldenkrais practitioner, I think of it more like it's the same principle. We talk about functional integration. Like, how can and when you do Feldenkrais awareness through movement lessons, which are basically movement lessons where you work with movement as a way of cultivating mindful awareness of, it calms the nervous system. It helps us increase the interoception that diminishes trauma. So trauma, we disconnect basically from our bodies because we're afraid to feel the pain. We don't want to feel the pain. So we disconnect, we disassociate. And so coming back from that is a slow process of creating a new relationship with the body, one where it feels like, the body is also a source of great pleasure and comfort and ease, but we have to find that. But the reason I went off on that tangent was because I was talking about music as a way of doing something similar, which anything that calms the nervous system is good, and anything that helps us make a state change. And it's hard to describe what a state change is, but I'm pretty willing to bet that it has something to do with brainwave states. So if we have these identities that are negative, right? So and I do all these groups and I do these therapies and I try to do these behavioral changes, and it's all pretty much cognitive. It's probably all conscious. Like, I'll go along for months or years possibly and make an improvement. But then it's going to snap back. Have you ever had that experience where, you've done really well and you just like, I don't know what it is, but for some reason, a year later, year and a half, it's like all of a sudden I snap back and I'm finding myself being or doing some personality that I don't want to be anymore. Does that sound familiar? So
I have been that way for about 6 months now.
So if you think of like, this is the identity or the belief that's limiting, and I'm trying to get better from it. If you think of it like a rubber band, which I don't have one right on top, you know, it's like you can stretch it as you get better
Yeah.
at new behaviors. But at some point, it's like either it breaks and snaps back or something. I don't know. But it's a pattern of oscillation. So the victim identity is like that. And so and what happens is it looks like it's going away because we stop doing the obvious things. Like I stopped even talking to people that were in any way abusive. But then it would show up in other ways. Like I would end up you know, getting a job, say, with a female authority figure as boss who seemed fine in the first few months. And then all of a sudden it got really weird, right? So all of a sudden,
Uh-huh.
pattern again. What's going on, you know? And so that's, you know, the structure that we talked about more last week. So then going back to this idea of a continuum, right? So on the one hand, realizing I should reverse this because for me this is the left side and for you guys it's the right side, right? That way. You have to do this all the price. You have to reverse everything, right? Because you're watching people who are lying down. So I think of the left side as the let's say you've got a victim mentality with somebody with a really bad attitude. They're whining and complaining all the time. You can spot them a mile away in the grocery store and you walk the other way because you don't want to hear it anymore because you're beyond that, right? But on the other end of the spectrum is somebody who has a great attitude. It's like, I've suffered this stuff and I want to overcome it. It's like the we shall overcome whole thing. It's a great attitude, but it's still a victim mentality. Does that make sense? So one is complaining and blaming, but the other one is actually borderline noble and borderline a martyr, right? So both they're two ends of polarities. They're polarities of the same identity on some level. So they're both hooked into this idea that, you know, there's something that we need to fight against or something we need to resist. And I don't know where I heard it, but even as a child, I remember hearing this idea, or even as a young adult, that I think it's an ancient Chinese maxim that what we resist persists. Do you find that to be true? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
These weird little aphorisms 5,000 years because there's a nugget of wisdom in them.
Yeah.
And what this new understanding is actually based on is a hermetic principle which dates back to I forget his name, this ancient Greek philosopher whose name begins with a T. I have to study that a little bit because that's fairly new to me. But one of the principles of this hermetic understanding that's 5,000 years old is this idea that you know, these polarities, that these are polarities of the same principle, the same identity, and so so we're living with this perception that we're getting better when we're actually, it's just going underground a little bit. And these two different, and so the victim and the victim and the aggressor, they keep showing up because they attract each other on some level. Like the one who's the victim is usually, that's more of a passive role, and the one who's the helper is usually an active role. But have you ever noticed how sometimes the roles change? And, or like, that it inevitably seems to lead back to, like, the victim is getting help and the helper in the relationship is helping. And either the helper at some point says, no, I've had enough, go away, and the victim starts to say, become a tyrant. So the victim actually then becomes the one who's the aggressor on not the aggressor, but a tyrant, and saying, like, how could you leave me, just completely flipping out,
Right.
control the situation. Or conversely, the helper might get to a place where they become the tyrant. It's like, have you no idea how much I've sacrificed to try to help you, right? And these are these
Yeah.
patterns that keep recurring because it's like this inevitable structure. So the resolution is found in connecting with, this heart, that way of connecting to the source of innocence and wonder and beauty, right? Of like who we really are. So that's one of the reasons why, we spent some time, I think, in some of the first Surpass circles looking at values. Like, because what happens is we stop living according to our values when we sucked into these patterns, right? And so one of the ways to reconnect is to do what they do in the 12-step book, which is, like, let me do an inventory. Where have I actually started to transgress against my own values? Like, and for me, when I looked at that, I had to realize I'd stopped. The tendency to isolate made me stop being of service, whereas my previous life, that had pretty much been the way I organized my career, because I wanted to be of service. So I was denying, again, I had cut myself off from a huge part of who I was. So one of the pathways back is to look at your values, look at what's important to you, write down what you used to do that you loved, and reintegrate that. And create an identity that allows you to be that person. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So we should probably do a process. Let me see what else. I just want to double check I haven't missed any of this, or what parts of this. 6. Well, so I guess this is another piece that's relevant, is like the resolution is also found in changing the way we hold what's going on, right? So when we start to look at life as it's not like people are bad or good, or the victim is bad, or even that the aggressor is bad. It's that people are doing the best they can. They're stuck in these patterns that are unconscious. And so it's really like, if you shift your paradigm so that it's, you understand that the people in my life are a reflection of me, then that relinquishes all blame. Like, there's no blame going on if I start to own that, there's some vibe that I'm sending out that's attracting these people to me. And so that frees us up. So, it's about this story that we tell ourselves about who we are, and just shifting the way we're looking at it. Like, instead of looking at it like, oh, woe is me, I've had this difficult life. What if we shift it to think about it in terms of, even in an oyster, the way that a pearl is formed is that there's a grain of sand, there's grit that gets inside the shell, and it creates this, it spins like the web around it, sort of, and that's how a pearl is created. So it creates something beautiful out of a piece of grit, basically. And so if we look at negative emotions as directives, like, go this way, don't go that way. If we look at the contrasts that happens, the things that are unwanted, let's call them contrasts, because that's a very neutral word. If we look at the contrast that happens that we don't want, okay, well, so what's the flip side of that? And so that's kind of brings us full circle. We started with the question, where was there anything that happened this week that, you know, brought you to a place where you were able to find some unexpected benefit? I wonder if we any comments, thoughts, questions?
Actually, and I'm not just saying this to make you feel better, but when within the week, this week, I looked at your, I don't know if do you call these podcasts?
Podcasts
your, the last one.
These, the Surpass Circle recordings or YouTube.
Okay. Your last one that I only got partway through, but when I watched that, listened to that, again, just like the music that I was listening to, when I was listening to you talk, it was triggering myself that I want to be, that I really am, you know, the kind and compassionate and loving and calm and, you know, that was the added benefit that I didn't expect. You know, I super grateful for that because it brought me to today, to watching this one.
And I'm glad you're here, and I love you guys for showing up because I need the support too. You know, I'm feeling the isolation too. So thank you.
Right.
I want to point out too. Listen to what you were saying. You're already better at this than some people are, in the sense that when you were describing how you felt, you were able to generate a list of adjectives with a certain rhythm, and you're musical. So let me just interject this idea that's a technique or a strategy for self-soothing and for making a state change. So what you do is you can do this in writing, or you can do it verbally. You can record yourself doing it, but basically you just actually, why don't we do that as a little bit of a written exercise so that I'm not just talking about it. Can you grab a piece of paper and a pencil? And I'll do it.
Got it.
All right, so just generate a list of adjectives that it takes you into what is it you would like to feel, who is it you would like to be, or how would you like to be held. Either one of those, that's anything that speaks to you. So just
can you say those again? I'm writing them down. I'm a slow writer.
Well, I was giving people 3 different options just so they could go wherever they want, but one was generate a list of adjectives that is about how you would like to feel. Or option 2 was who you would like to be. And then option 3 might be actually external instead of internal. It's how would you like to be held? In other words, would you like to feel welcome, respected, have people be thoughtful about interacting with you? That one's a little bit trickier, but it's also relevant, right?
Can you say those again? How would you like to be held, and those descriptions, please?
Yeah. So the assignment is to generate a list of adjectives that you sort of just write as fast as you can with little commas in between, with no judgment. And one is, how would you like to feel? Like, what would be your ideal feeling in life in general? What would feel good? How would you, so we started with point A, which is, this is where we are, no judgment, just where we are. Point B is, how would you like to feel? So examples might be, I'd like to feel, for me, I didn't even know, like, the word joy was not in my vocabulary for many years all of a sudden. So I couldn't reach for joy. That was too far away. That was too far along the continuum. In the middle was satisfaction. So from satisfaction, I could get to content or comforted or comfortable. And then from content satisfied, content, comfortable, I could get to, I might be able to get to happy, but it was still a long way from joy and bliss, right? We're on the far continuum, right? So you start with what feels like something that you could say that feels true, and from there you gradually move into things that are maybe a bigger stretch. So number two was um, point point A is who I'm being now. I'm being this person that I'm not really fond of. I don't really like who I'm being, right? So point number two is who would I want to be? I would like to be someone who can relate to other people, or who could be generous, or who has the wherewithal to be generous, or who has the stability and the financial stability to be generous. That would be nice. I think I'd like that. You know, that's just an example. And then the third one, how would I like to be held? And that's more external than internal, but it's still like, it's more like, how would I like other people to respond to me? And yeah, I sort of gave an example of that first. So, you know, I'd like to be made welcome. I'd like to be included. I'd like to be thought of. I'd like to be, have people notice that people are aware of me, that sort of thing. So I'll just leave. So I'm going to pick one and write for, I don't know, let's do the timer thing, because there's something really powerful about that. I'll just set it for 2 minutes, but write as much as you can. And
Just stay on one thing or go through all of them?
Stay on one thing for as long as you can, and
okay.
And if you know you don't have enough stuff, then start with it. All right.
Oh.
So the point is to sort of use rhythm and cadence and words and connect to the feelings and build on that to sort of entrain yourself because into a different state. Did that work?
I'm not sure. I kind of am tense now because at first I was writing sentences and I would like to feel this way, blah, blah, blah. And then my brain finally switched over to, no, just adjectives. And I don't know if that was correct or not. So then I started listing the feelings. I went with the number one, just the adjectives. And that felt more freeing.
Yeah.
Because I was doing commas and periods and,
Right.
I'm like, no.
So, two sides of the brain, right? As a creative writing instructor, they're very clear that you have to separate the editing process and the creative process. So in the creative process is generative, no punctuation, no editing, no judgment, just put words on paper. And then if you're actually going to try and present it to somebody for some other thing, then you go in and you edit for whatever. But line edits have no place in this kind of quick write. And so, but yeah, so if you're writing sentences, it's a good way to start creating a new identity for your, like, who is it I want to be? But with this particular exercise, it's like a self, I don't know, I need to come up with a good name for it, but it's a self-soothing exercise, right? And the idea is to just do adjectives, maybe use commas because, that makes it easier to read, but then say them aloud or in your own mind with certain rhythm. And there's something about rhythm. Like what is a child, like why does a car or the rocking of a rocking chair soothe a baby to sleep? Something about rhythm that into the nervous system. And then, I also have this video out there about the polyvagal system and how it affects trauma. And, one of the things that it shows is that we're in this heightened state of hyperarousal. And so we need to do things that calm the nervous system. Was it, Michelle, how was that exercise for you?
Good. I wrote a little bit on all three.
Okay. Do either of you want to just try reading just the adjectives part just to see if you can hear yourself feel flink into the rhythm of reading it that way? Kathy, do you want to start just the last part?
Okay. Yes. Happy, loving, compassionate, forgiving, generous in all ways.
Okay. So that's great. So notice that, but hear the intonation, right? So you read it the way people read, which is kind of normal.
Yeah.
But as an exercise in self-soothing, it's like I want to feel. I can't remember the words you said, but you read it in this way where you have this rhythm to it. It's like I want to feel happy. I want to feel free. I want to feel.
Okay.
It's like you. Do you want to try it again?
With the feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try it again, just to demonstrate it. It's different at first.
Happy, loving, compassionate, forgiving, generous in all ways.
Yeah. So you're getting and so this is an exercise you can do in your mind when you first wake up in the morning to designate how you'd like your day to be. Like I'd like to, or to like one of the exercises that's very similar that I actually have a recording of, which I should make available to people. I mean, I have, it's in one of the first versions of the other program that I designed. So this is like a ongoing process, but it was about like a rampage of appreciation first thing in the morning of like just waking up and feeling comfortable and safe. And on Sundays, especially, I feel open and free and like I'm on vacation. It's like I don't have any obligations. There's nothing I have to do for somebody else. And so it's like you can use words and adjectives and momentum and rhythm to generate a state change. And if you do it, especially first thing in the morning, it's easier to do it because you don't have all these thoughts in your mind. Then you can take that into the day and you're it may not last all day, but it'll give you a really good feeling throughout at least the first, at first it'll only last maybe a half hour, then it'll last a couple of hours, and then maybe it'll last the whole morning. And when you get good at it after a week or two, it's like, wow, I can go till 4 o'clock without bumping into somebody who's being a jerk in the grocery store and reacting to it. Because of course it's not them that's making me feel bad. It's me that's reacting to them.
Right.
Whatever they're doing. So I want to be respectful of people's time, and I'm also going to get better at timing it so that I can introduce the material and still give people plenty of time to speak here, because I know a big piece of our need in this situation is self-expression and to be heard. So I want to just put it out there as a question. Do you guys want to do a process, or you feel like you want to quit now because it is 10:30 and we're...
What process?
I would love to continue to do a process.
I have like probably at least 12 different processes that are like these guided visualizations that we've done before. Do you want to, I mean, I guess I'll do one. And then Michelle, if you want to out, good. Because so what we've done here, this writing exercise, is actually a really good thing to do to prepare for the process, because the processes are often about like, who is this person that I want to create? So since you've got pen and paper out, just write down, like there are different areas, right? So we can do the same process several times. So I'm just going to start with a beginning process, and this may be familiar to yourself, but just write down one thing that you would like, either in the area of, in any area of your life. So just pick one thing and say, what would I like to create? What would you like to create? So if you're talking in terms of, well, I mean, we've been talking about identity and archetypes and victim. So, I mean, that's another way to do this, is to be more specific and make it relevant to the topic. So what would you like to create in terms of an identity that is free of this whole victim martyr crap?
Yes, that's exactly what I want.
Okay.
I don't want that crap anymore.
Okay, so how could you flip that? And instead of moving away from something, how could you flip it? Write down, I would like to create an identity as someone who is So if you've come up with something that's kind of short and succinct, it's probably good, because you want to be able to state it in a sentence, like a choice. Like, I choose to be someone who has agency. I choose to create work that allows me to have meaningful conversations with interesting human beings. Right? I don't know. I choose to,
Yeah.
I choose to be someone, I don't know. Anybody want to throw something out there? Okay.
I'm ready.
What do you got, Michelle? What do you want to speak it, or do you want to keep it to yourself? Well, it's fine. I don't care. So it's all right. Okay. So, Kathy, do you want to share what came up for you, or you want to just go
Sure.
ahead?
I choose to be someone who is strong but soft, and loving and compassionate with strong boundaries. Um, I choose to be forgiving and not judgmental. I don't know if that's a
Yeah,
good
that's
way to put it all, but those are the
all great
ways.
stuff.
And yeah.
I think we can work more with true choices another time. There may be more about that in the other video. I can't remember. I've been doing a lot of different videos, so but
I'm going to have to watch all of your videos.
okay. Good. So yeah, I would just say for now, for this process, that's excellent. And then could you, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most resistance, how much resistance do you feel to that right now? So pick a number, like a 10 being I'm really resistant, or 2 or 5 being I feel some resistance. Like how much is the resistance right now? Could you give it a number? And write the number down. Like if there's a ton of people on the call, I would have people just type it in. But since there's only 3 of us, don't worry about it. Do you want to just say the number of resistance?
5.
What was that, Michelle?
5.
5. Okay, that's good. Kathy?
I, I have two numbers, of course, on both. Like not much resistance, like maybe a 3, but then when I think about forgiving, then it goes to maybe a 9.
So that means you're not picking one. We can only like really do this process on one thing at a time. So you have to pick one thing. So
All
one
right, so forgiving part is very strong. I would pick that one. 9. That's very. I'm very resistant to forgiving right now.
Okay. So forgiving is a worthy of a whole video in itself. Maybe can we tweak it to being forgiving rather than forgiving? Because that'll take you in the direction of like in the spirit of what we were just doing, you want to soothe yourself
Okay.
towards what you want to be or become rather than, thou shalt
Okay.
do this thing, right? Which is guilt ridden. So it's like maybe
Okay. Thank you.
is easier to sit with. Yeah. A little bit.
That softens it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
So then,
Yeah.
so you've rated your resistance and then just take 30 seconds to tap into how it feels now compared to where you would like it to be. And then could you just think about what would a person have to believe for things to be the way they are now compared to how you want it to be? What would a person have to believe for the way things are to be true? All right, so now we're going to sort of do a little bit of a closed eye process. And so maybe make yourself comfortable and sit back and close your eyes. And again, just connect with your seat bones and your feet and feel yourself solid in the chair. Maybe slow your breathing down. Play with breathing, this idea of square breathing where you breathe in to the count of 2 and you hold for another 2 counts. So, and you exhale 1, 2, and you hold 3, 4, and then you inhale 1, 2, hold 3, 4, and you exhale and so on. And then imagine that you're feeling exactly this, that you have this belief that you are enough. Like, what would it feel like to be, what would a person be like if they were someone who had this conviction that I'm enough? Imagine how you would hold yourself. Imagine how other people might respond to you differently. Imagine how it would feel in your body. Where would it start? Where would, maybe it would be in the gut or in your solar plexus or in your heart, that you'd feel the sense of feeling enoughness, of freedom from constraint, of really a sense of innocence, a sense of unself-conscious. And allow that feeling to expand into your whole body so that you feel it in every single one of your cells. So you feel a sense that you're able to be yourself, to be free to interact with people with no reservations, no judgment, no holding back, just spontaneous and open and trusting in the way that children are. You can connect with that level of innocence. It's see if you can connect with the part of you that was present before you got sort of programmed into concepts about what you had to do to be acceptable. See if you can sort of come up out of your body, float back in time, and come back down when you were maybe just before the first time that you experienced some event or person that created that sense of resistance. So float back to a place in time when you were small, before you ever felt the resistance. There was, in fact, possibly no need ever to forgive because there was no sense of anything happening that required that. And now, from that place, could you make a new decision, a decision that allows you to believe that I am enough. I'm enough exactly as I am. And tapping back into that broader connection that we have from the place that is like this unified field that where we're stepping outside of the human condition and into that broader sense of existence, of beingness, that helps us sort of really tap into a sense of knowing that none of all this little human drama is really even going to matter in 100 years, in 200 years. Like, there's something vaster than all of this. And from that perspective, I'm enough. Not even any need to be forgiving. Free from justification, free from a need to validate, free to just be myself exactly as I am. Good. And now come down back into this timeline where you're moving forward in time and experience maybe one event along the way between there and where and this present moment where something's different. What's different as you experience some of the events in your life through this new decision? How would you have reacted differently? What's now possible? And go forward in time and maybe experience another situation in your life that you see through a different perspective, that you respond to differently from this new decision. And notice what changes go from there all the way back to now with your new decision. And when you get back to now with your new decision, come back down into the room. And when you're here, you can open your eyes and just check in and on a scale of 1 to 10, what is the level of resistance that you feel inside? And trust your intuition, like the first 3 seconds, whatever number comes up.
I had a 5 there at the end.
You had a 5 at the end, so you went from a 9 to a 5, right?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So, Michelle, any numbers coming up?
Yeah, I think the veil of impossibility was lifted a bit. I think I may have gone down a little bit in resistance, maybe a 3 or a 4.
Did you have a number that you started with in terms of resistance and
5 and then 3 or 4.
okay. Well, you kind of sort of only did half of the process too, so
Yeah.
so let's just let me think here. So let's go back in for one more time and see if we can clear that, because just going back in and back out and back in and back out, it's like mind expanding. And so what we want to do is expand your awareness, not just what that means is expand your ability to shift your own state. So I'm going to ask you to go back in, so close your eyes. Take a couple of deep breaths and exhale and just let all negative emotion and all negative vibration go out through your exhale. And going back in. So remember any event in the past where, because of that old way of being, that old identity that you used to have, imagine, connect with an event in the past wherein you limited your options. And go back and notice if that decision is still there, or has it been in some way redecided out of this new decision of enough, of being enough. Good. And then I want you to go into some unspecified time in the future, which, if it had happened in the past, you would have responded to differently. But now that you've redecided, go there in light of your new decision and experience how that plays out now. And then come back to now. And when you're ready, open your eyes and just check in spontaneously so that you come to start trusting your intuition, and that you begin to have a habit of checking in with yourself. Like if you were to look inside and sense, what number would I give the resistance now? Is it a same number or is it a little bit smaller? And just come up with a number in the first 3 seconds. So open your eyes.